I have always been the kind of person who enjoys disappearing into places most people would never think to visit. My favorite adventures have always been far away from crowds, deep in forests, remote nature areas, and forgotten places where silence feels heavier than anywhere else. Sometimes I would explore abandoned buildings or forgotten locations, but most of the time I just wanted to experience places that felt untouched. A common way I found these locations was by searching through obscure online communities, forums, and posts where people shared hidden spots that most people never knew existed. And before this trip, I had never experienced anything truly disturbing. No strange encounters. No moments where I felt unsafe. Nothing that made me question whether I should have been there. But what happened during this particular trip is something I still struggle to fully understand even months later. I found the location through a small post online. It barely had any attention, almost no comments, and looked like something most people had completely overlooked. The person who posted it described a remote section of forest containing multiple cave openings scattered around a mountain area. Not just one cave, several. According to the post, there were somewhere between 10 and 15 different openings hidden throughout the area. At first, I thought it sounded incredible. The only downside was the distance. The location was so remote that it wasn't something I could simply visit for a few hours. It required a serious hike, meaning I would need to bring camping equipment and spend at least one night out there. But honestly, that only made it more appealing. I packed my gear, drove nearly 3 hours, and headed toward a remote section of a national forest. I won't mention the exact location, but this place was far away from anything. The so-called trailhead wasn't even a proper trailhead. After driving several miles down a rough dirt road that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years, the road simply ended. No parking lot, no signs, no designated area. Just a dead end surrounded by wilderness. According to the information I had, this was where the trail began. There was only a faint path disappearing between the trees. I pulled my vehicle onto the grass, grabbed my backpack, checked my supplies one last time, and started walking. Almost immediately, something about the trail felt wrong. I couldn't explain exactly what it was. There were no obvious signs, no warnings, no strange sounds. But somehow I could tell this wasn't a place people visited often. I've been on plenty of forgotten trails before. I've walked through areas where nature had slowly reclaimed the path. But this felt different. This felt like I wasn't just alone on a trail. It felt like I was the only person in the entire forest. The silence was unnatural. The kind of silence where every step you take feels too loud. Still, I kept moving. After several hours of hiking, I finally reached the area where the caves were supposed to begin. And almost immediately, I noticed something that made me stop. There was a tent sitting in the middle of a small clearing. A medium-sized camping tent. Except it didn't look like someone was using it. It looked abandoned, dirty, weathered, barely still standing. And honestly, there are few things more unsettling to discover in the middle of nowhere than an abandoned tent. Because when someone leaves behind a tent, it usually means one thing. They didn't have time to take it down. A tent is one of the last things someone abandons. You pack your food. You grab your important belongings. You take your survival gear. But the tent, that's the thing you leave behind when you need to leave immediately. When you don't have time. When something makes you decide that staying another minute isn't an option. So the thought naturally crossed my mind. What made whoever owned this tent leave so suddenly? What happened here? Looking back, I can't believe I didn't think harder about that while I was standing there. At the time, I just assumed someone had finished camping and left it behind. I walked past it and continued toward the mountain. Soon I reached the rock face where the cave openings were located. Several of them were tiny, barely large enough to crawl through. I ignored those. But then I saw one opening that immediately caught my attention. It was much larger than the others. And strangely enough, it was also one of the most hidden. Trees and thick bushes surrounded the entrance, almost like nature itself was trying to cover it up. I stood there for a moment looking into the darkness. Then I pulled out my flashlight. The beam reached into the cave, revealing a narrow passage that quickly tightened into something resembling a tunnel. It reminded me of an old mine shaft, except this wasn't man-made. It was completely natural. The light traveled surprisingly far, but even at the edge of where the flashlight reached, there was nothing. Just darkness. Pure darkness. I took a few steps inside, and almost immediately I felt it. That feeling. The kind of instinct that doesn't come from logic. A deep, uncomfortable warning from somewhere inside your mind telling you that something is wrong. I stopped. I stood there for a few seconds, staring into the darkness. And for once I actually listened to that feeling. I turned around and walked out. Looking back, that may have been the smartest decision I made during the entire trip. I checked a few of the other cave openings from the outside, but every single one gave me the same uneasy feeling. I couldn't explain why. Nothing happened. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. but I had absolutely no desire to step inside. Eventually, I started walking around the area trying to decide what I was going to do. Part of me considered setting up camp near the abandoned tent. Another part of me wanted to move farther away and find another location. Then suddenly I heard something. It came from the larger cave entrance. The sound echoed through the trees and bounced around the rocks. It was distorted, unclear, almost impossible to identify. At first it sounded like a laugh, then it sounded like a scream, but somehow it sounded like neither. It was something caught between the two, something that almost sounded human, but not completely. I froze. I stared toward the cave entrance, waiting for something else, anything. But after that sound, everything went completely silent. No movement, no footsteps, nothing. I stayed there for maybe 30 seconds before deciding I had seen and heard enough. I left. I walked back down the trail, constantly looking over my shoulder. The entire place felt wrong, like I had stepped into somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. After about an hour of hiking, the sun was getting too low. Continuing deeper into the forest wasn't a smart choice, so I set up camp right beside the trail. I didn't make a fire. I didn't cook. I didn't do anything unnecessary. I just wanted the night to pass. I wanted morning to come so I could leave, because after all the remote places I had visited, all the strange locations I had explored, this was the first time I had ever felt this kind of fear. And when your instincts are screaming at you that something is wrong, you don't ignore that. I climbed into my tent and spent the next few hours lying there waiting for sleep. But sleep never really came. Then suddenly, while I was lying there in the darkness, I felt it. That same feeling returned. The overwhelming urge that something was nearby. The feeling that my body was trying to tell me something my mind didn't want to accept. The feeling that I needed to look outside to make sure I wasn't alone. I hadn't heard anything. That was the part that bothered me the most. There were no footsteps outside my tent. No voices. No branches snapping. No obvious sign that anything was nearby. The feeling had just appeared out of nowhere. A sudden, overwhelming sense that something was wrong. Every instinct in my body was telling me to look outside, but another part of me was fighting against it. I knew exactly what would happen if I unzipped that tent. I would be staring into a completely black forest in the middle of nowhere. My flashlight would barely cut through the darkness, and if I didn't see anything, I would probably feel even worse. Sometimes not knowing what's out there is easier than finding out. But I couldn't ignore the feeling. It kept building. That strange pressure in my chest. That uncomfortable sense of being watched. After about 5 minutes of lying there, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. I needed to break that horrible feeling of uncertainty. Slowly, I reached over and grabbed the zipper. I opened the tent. And the moment I looked outside, every bit of fear I had been feeling suddenly became real. Down the trail in the direction of the caves, there was someone standing there. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness made it hard to understand what I was seeing. But then my eyes adjusted, and I realized there wasn't just one person. There were several. A group of people standing together in the middle of the trail. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching me. They were close. Too close. Maybe 20 feet away from my tent. And the worst part was realizing that they had probably been there for a while. They weren't walking toward me. They weren't searching. They were simply observing, like they had been standing there silently waiting for me to notice them. I knew immediately that they had seen me. There was no question. My entire body went cold. I didn't stop to think. I didn't try to figure out who they were or what they wanted. I grabbed my backpack and climbed out of the tent as quickly as possible. I didn't pack anything. I didn't take down my tent. I didn't even grab the smaller items I had left outside. I just needed distance. The entire time they watched. They never rushed toward me. They never spoke. They just stood there. But I could see them moving. Small movements. Subtle shifts. Their bodies adjusting. Their heads turning whenever I moved. That was when I knew I wasn't imagining it. These weren't shadows. They weren't strange shapes created by darkness. They were real. I slowly backed away down the trail, keeping my eyes locked on them. I was terrified to turn around. Terrified that the second I looked away, something would happen. So I kept moving backward, watching the group the entire time. Eventually, I reached a point where the darkness and distance swallowed them from view. That was when I turned around. And I ran. Well, as much as I could. The trail was difficult, even during the day. At night, with panic taking over and my hands shaking, it felt almost impossible to follow. Every few seconds, I looked behind me. I never saw them. Not once. But I knew. I could feel it. I felt like they were still there, following, keeping their distance, staying somewhere just beyond where I could see. I kept moving until I finally reached my vehicle. The moment I got inside and started the engine, I felt a little bit of the fear loosen its grip. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove. Even now, I still don't know what I found out there. I don't know who those people were. I don't know why they were standing near those caves. I don't know what happened to the person who left that abandoned tent behind. But I do know one thing. If I had ignored that feeling and entered those caves or tunnels, I genuinely believe I would not have walked back out. That instinct that told me to leave may have been the only thing that saved me. The following story happened last summer when my two friends and I, who I'll call Corey and Tyler, went camping in Montana. We were just a group of college students who loved being outdoors. We liked hiking, exploring, and spending nights around a campfire drinking and talking until we got tired. But this trip was different from anything we had done before. It was the most ambitious camping trip we had ever attempted. Getting to our location required roughly a 5-hour hike. And this wasn't a normal campsite. There were no bathrooms, no parking lot, no other campers nearby. It was simply a flat area near the base of a mountain that looked like a good place to set up. Usually our trips were much easier. We would drive somewhere, walk a short distance, and camp near where we parked. This time felt different. This felt like actual wilderness. The kind of place where, once you arrived, you were completely separated from everything. And honestly, during the first full day, we loved it. All three of us agreed that we might never want to camp any other way again. There was something incredible about being that far away from everyone. No strangers, no noise, no rules, just us. We could talk as loudly as we wanted, laugh around the fire, and enjoy the feeling of being completely alone in nature. That night we stayed up around the campfire drinking beers until around 1:00 the morning, probably later than we should have. Eventually exhaustion caught up with us. We put out the fire, crawled into our tents, and passed out. About an hour later I woke up. The combination of all those drinks caught up with me, and my bladder was practically forcing me awake. Still half asleep, I climbed out of my tent. The entire area was completely dark. I didn't want to wander far, so I walked only about 30 feet into the woods. Far enough for privacy, but close enough that I could still find my way back. When I finished, I turned around to head back, and that's when I noticed something. At first, I didn't see anything, but after standing in the darkness for a few seconds, my eyes started adjusting, and then I saw someone, a person standing farther ahead in the woods, completely still. At first I assumed it was Tyler. Maybe he had woken up too and gone out for the same reason. The figure looked like him, so I didn't think much of it. But then I kept watching, and something felt wrong. He wasn't moving, not even slightly. I stared for a few seconds longer. Then I started walking toward him. "Tyler?" Nothing. "Hey, Tyler." Still nothing. "What are you doing?" No response. Not even a turn of the head. I looked past him, trying to figure out what he was staring at, but there was nothing. Just endless darkness. When I got close enough, I stepped beside him and looked at his face. His eyes were open, but his expression was completely empty. No emotion, no reaction, nothing. It was like he was awake but not actually there. My first thought was that he must be sleepwalking. That had to be it. There was no other explanation. "Tyler, are you okay? Come on, let's go back. It's way too dark to be standing out here." But he didn't answer. He didn't move. So I reached out and touched his shoulder, thinking maybe I could guide him back toward the tents. The moment my hand touched him, he snapped back. His head turned instantly, and he stared directly at me. His eyes were wide. His face was impossible to read. I couldn't tell if he looked terrified, angry, or something else entirely. But whatever it was, it scared me. Then after a few seconds of staring at me, Tyler's expression slowly faded. The fear, the confusion, whatever had been there, it all disappeared. His face became completely blank again. Without saying a single word, he turned around, walked back toward the campsite, climbed into his tent, and zipped it shut. I just stood there for a moment trying to understand what I had just witnessed. Eventually, I walked back to my own tent and got inside. But sleep was almost impossible after that. For the rest of the night, I kept waking up every 30 minutes or so, staring into the darkness of my tent and replaying the moment over and over in my head. The only explanation I could come up with was sleepwalking. It was strange. It was unsettling, but realistically it was probably harmless. At least that was what I kept telling myself. When morning finally came, we all crawled out of our tents and started talking like nothing had happened. And that was when I noticed something strange. Neither of them seemed to know anything about the night before. Tyler was completely normal. He was joking around, laughing, and acting exactly like himself. Corey seemed like he had slept through the entire thing. I started wondering if maybe Tyler remembered what happened but just didn't want to mention it. But the way he was acting didn't seem like someone hiding something. He genuinely seemed normal. So I convinced myself that it really was just some kind of sleepwalking episode. Something weird, but nothing worth worrying about. I decided not to bring it up. The rest of the morning was actually pretty relaxing. We stayed around the campsite, taking it easy after the long hike from the day before. The area was peaceful again. The fear from the previous night slowly started feeling like a strange memory instead of something that had actually happened. Then, around 0 inches the evening, as the sun started dropping behind the mountains, we got up to collect more firewood. We spread out around the campsite, grabbing branches and tossing them into a pile while casually talking. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Just 3 friends enjoying a camping trip. I don't even remember exactly what Corey said, but he made some dumb joke and I laughed before turning toward Tyler. I called out to him, "Hey Tyler, what do you think?" No response. At first I assumed he just didn't hear me, so I looked around, and that's when I saw him. He was standing on the opposite side of the campsite, completely still, just staring into the woods. My stomach dropped, because it looked exactly like the night before. The same posture, the same emptiness, the same way he seemed disconnected from everything around him, except this time there was no possible explanation. He wasn't asleep. He wasn't waking up from a dream. He was standing there in the middle of the evening, completely awake. I looked over at Corey, and I could tell immediately that he had noticed too. His expression changed. He called Tyler's name. Nothing. He called again. Still nothing. The 2 of us exchanged confused looks and started walking toward him. As we got closer, Corey became more concerned. "Tyler. Hey Tyler, are you okay?" Again and again he called his name, but Tyler didn't react. Not until we were standing directly in front of him. Then suddenly he turned around. "What?" He looked at both of us with genuine confusion, like he had no idea why we were standing there. I just stared at him. Corey immediately asked if he was all right. Tyler said he was fine, and while they talked, I watched his face carefully. I wasn't looking for a lie. I was looking for any sign that he knew what had just happened, but there wasn't one. He looked completely unaware, like he had lost track of the last few minutes, like he had no memory of us calling his name, walking toward him, and standing right in front of him. "Dude, we were calling you for a while," Corey said. "You were just standing there, staring into the woods. Are you sure you're okay?" Tyler nodded. Then he looked at us like we were the strange ones. I glanced behind him, the direction he had been staring toward. There was nothing. Just trees. Just darkness slowly beginning to settle in. No animal. No person. Nothing. Looking back, I know it sounds strange that after that we didn't immediately leave, but at the time both incidents felt like isolated moments. Weird moments. Definitely unsettling, but brief. The entire rest of the trip, Tyler had been completely normal. While hiking, while sitting around camp, while talking and joking, there was nothing else unusual about him. So we convinced ourselves there was nothing to worry about. We went back to collecting wood. That night, we sat around the campfire again, drinking and laughing until late. Eventually, around midnight, we went back to our tents, but for some reason, I never fell asleep. I just laid there, turning, adjusting, trying to get comfortable, but my body refused to shut down. Something kept me awake. After a couple of hours, I finally had to use the bathroom. Honestly, I had been holding it for as long as I could. The thought of stepping outside into that darkness again made me uncomfortable, but eventually I gave up. I climbed out of my tent. The forest was completely silent. I looked over at Tyler's tent, then Corey's. Both were still zipped shut. Everyone was asleep. I walked toward the same area where Tyler had been standing the previous night, but this time I didn't immediately turn away. I stood there. I waited. I let my eyes adjust to the darkness. I scanned the trees, the shadows, the empty space around me. It only took about 15 seconds. Then I saw something. A figure. Standing in the exact same place where Tyler had been the night before. My heart dropped. For one brief moment, I thought it was him again. I immediately started walking forward. "Tyler?" No answer. I took a few more steps. "Tyler?" Still nothing. Then I stopped. Because something was wrong. This wasn't Tyler. The shape was different. The way it stood, the way its body was positioned, everything about it felt wrong. And then I realized the most terrifying detail. It wasn't staring into the woods. It was facing me. My entire body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there staring at this figure in the darkness. And then in an instant, everything changed. The figure disappeared. Not walked away. Not ran. Just gone. I turned my head, and suddenly Corey was standing beside me. His hand was on my shoulder. His face was filled with concern. He told me he heard me calling out for Tyler. He said he came outside and found me standing there, and when he asked if I was okay, I didn't respond. I had been standing there completely frozen. The fear I felt in that moment is something I still struggle to describe, because suddenly everything connected. Tyler standing there twice, the figure in the woods, the feeling of being watched, the caves, the strange silence, all of it. I looked at Corey and told him we needed to leave. Immediately. I didn't even try to explain everything. I just told him someone was out there watching us. I knew if I tried to tell him the whole story right then, standing in the middle of the forest in the middle of the night, he might not believe me. So we went back. We woke Tyler up, and strangely enough, he didn't argue. He didn't question us. He didn't ask why we were leaving in the middle of the night. He just started packing. I still don't know what to make of that. I'm not saying Tyler was lying. I'm not saying he knew something. But the fact that he was willing to leave immediately without needing any explanation still bothers me. We packed everything as quickly as possible, grabbed our flashlights, stayed alert, and then, while the forest remained completely silent around us, we started hiking back toward the trailhead in the darkness. I had spent nearly 8 hours making that journey back, most of it through complete darkness, before the first signs of daylight finally began breaking through the trees. In the days and weeks that followed, the three of us talked about what happened at that campsite more times than I can count. Even now, a full year later, it is still something that comes up whenever we get together. But the strangest part is that we still do not have any real answers. Tyler has always insisted that he has no memory of seeing anyone standing in the woods watching us. He says he does not remember those moments when he was standing there, staring into the darkness, or even behaving strangely at all. And to be fair, I also do not remember Corey calling my name or walking toward me during that final incident. Yet I know what I saw. I know the fear I felt. I know there was something standing there in front of me. Maybe there is some explanation for it. Maybe there is something simple that we just cannot understand. But after everything that happened out there, I honestly do not know what to believe. I only know that whatever was happening in those woods made us leave in the middle of the night, and I have never looked at camping the same way since. Years later, I still think about that night and wonder what was really watching us. I live on a fairly large property, surrounded by woods. Almost every acre behind my house is covered by forest, and because my property sits at the very end of the road, the land behind it connects directly to a large, government-owned forest area. Technically, anyone could walk through there. There were no fences, no signs, and no real restrictions. Every once in a while, I would take a tent, some basic supplies, and spend a night or two camping out there. It was never anything extreme. I was not some experienced wilderness survival person. I mostly stayed close to home because I had no interest in getting lost miles away from civilization. One weekend near the end of autumn, I decided to do exactly that. I packed my gear, walked about 30 minutes into the woods, and found a small clearing that looked like a decent place to set up camp. The spot was quiet, isolated, and peaceful. At first, everything felt normal. I spent the next hour setting up my tent, arranging my things, and building a small fire pit. I had barely finished getting comfortable when something happened that immediately changed the entire mood of the night. A man stepped out from the trees and walked directly toward my campsite. He was probably in his mid-20s, average height, but there was something unsettling about him right away. His hair was long, greasy, and hanging around his face. It looked almost wet, like he had not washed it in a very long time. His clothes looked worn, and his entire appearance gave off the impression of someone who had been wandering around alone for days. But what stood out most was his expression. He looked nervous. Not just uncomfortable or lost. Nervous. Like he was worried about something. When he reached my campsite, he stopped and asked me in a flat, emotionless voice if he was close to the Forest Service road. I told him not really. The road he was probably talking about was several miles away from where we were. The man looked around the woods almost like he was trying to figure out where he was. Then he simply said, "Okay." No explanation. No follow-up question. Nothing. He just turned around and walked back into the trees. At the time, I did not think much of it. But later, when I replayed that interaction in my head, one detail bothered me more than anything else. During the entire conversation, I had my hand inside my pocket, gripping my small folding knife. I did not even realize I was doing it until afterward. I told myself I was not scared. I told myself I was just being cautious. But clearly, some part of me had sensed something was wrong before my mind could even process it. Because the truth was, the whole encounter made no sense. If he was lost, why did he not say he was lost? Why ask about a road that was miles away without explaining where he came from, or where he was trying to go? After he disappeared back into the forest, I sat there for another hour trying to convince myself I was overthinking everything. Eventually, I started my campfire and sat down with some food, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the trees. Usually I loved that feeling. The silence. The isolation. The sense that there was nobody around for miles. But that night was different. As darkness completely swallowed the forest, I found myself constantly looking into the tree line. And looking back now, I think my instincts were warning me for a reason. Because around 9:30 that night, while I was sitting alone beside the fire, I suddenly heard a voice. It came from somewhere in front of me, maybe 100 feet away, deep inside the darkness where I could not see anything. At first I thought I imagined it, but then I realized something that made my entire body go cold. It sounded exactly like the man from earlier, and he was calling my name. I slowly stood up from my chair beside the fire and stared into the endless darkness beyond the edge of the campsite. For the first time that night, I truly felt exposed. The fire behind me made me completely visible. Anyone standing out there in the trees would have been able to see me clearly, while I had absolutely no way of seeing them. I was standing in the open, and whoever was watching me had the advantage. Then the voice came again. It called out my name. This time, something about the way it sounded made my stomach tighten. It almost sounded like the person was asking for help, like they were lost or scared. But the more I listened, the less sense it made. Why would this person know my name? Why were they hiding in the woods instead of walking up to my campsite? And why did they sound exactly like the man who had appeared earlier? Against my better judgment, I stepped away from the fire and moved toward the darkness. I told myself I just needed to see who it was. I needed to prove to myself that there was a normal explanation. As I got closer, the voice continued calling out, slowly, calmly, almost like it was trying to lure me in. Then through the trees I finally saw him, a figure standing alone in the darkness, motionless, just beyond the edge of the clearing. He was facing directly toward me. The second I saw him, the voice stopped. Everything went silent. For about 10 seconds, neither of us moved. The forest was completely still. I could hear my own breathing. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt impossible that he could not hear it. Finally, with a shaky voice, I asked, "What do you want?" The figure did not answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me. I could not make out his face. The darkness swallowed almost every detail of him. Then after a moment, he spoke. And what he said made my entire body freeze. Am I close to the Forest Service road? It was the exact same question, the exact same words, the exact same tone. But what terrified me wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. The voice was identical. Not just similar, identical. The same dry, emotionless delivery. The same strange pauses. The same unnatural lack of expression. It sounded like someone had memorized the sentence perfectly and was repeating it back exactly the way they had heard it before. Like they were copying him. Like they were imitating a person they had watched. Standing there in the darkness, I suddenly noticed something else. Something that made the situation even more disturbing. This was not the same man who had come to my campsite earlier. The first man had long, greasy hair that hung around his shoulders. This figure did not. I still could not see his face clearly, but I could tell his outline was different. No long hair. A different shape. A different presence. Maybe he was taller. Maybe his build was different. The darkness made it hard to be certain. But one thing I knew for sure. This was not the same person. Yet he had the same voice. The exact same voice. That realization broke something in me. All the doubt I had been holding on to disappeared. I stopped trying to understand it. I stopped trying to find a logical explanation. I turned around and ran. I sprinted back toward my campsite as the figure behind me started calling my name again. I did not look back. I did not answer. I did not stop. The voice sounded like it was getting closer, and at that point, every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get away. I grabbed nothing. I left everything behind. My tent, my backpack, my supplies. Everything I had brought into those woods was abandoned exactly where I left it. All I cared about was getting home. Thankfully, I knew the way back. It was a straight path from the campsite to my house, and I ran the entire distance without slowing down. I did not stop until I was inside with the door locked behind me. That night, I never slept. I just sat there replaying every second over and over in my mind. The man, the voice, the question, the impossible similarity. When morning finally came, I was terrified to return to the campsite, but I knew I had to get my things. Eventually, I forced myself to go back, and when I arrived, everything was exactly as I had left it. My tent was still standing. My backpack was untouched. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been disturbed, which somehow made the entire experience even stranger. Because if someone had been out there, if someone had wanted something from me, then why leave everything behind? I never camped in those woods again. I never spent another night near that forest. Even now, years later, just looking toward the tree line after dark gives me a feeling I cannot explain. That same feeling from that night. The feeling that something is out there, watching, waiting. I do have my own theory about what I think I encountered in those woods, but honestly saying it out loud would probably make me sound completely insane, so I will keep it to myself. All I know is that I no longer feel safe living beside that forest. I plan to move away soon, far away from those trees, and I truly hope I never have another reason to talk about what happened there again.